Okay, if you've got a Bible, turn to Psalm 25, and if you're younger, you would have hopefully got a sheet with Psalm 25 on, so you guys can follow along here. There's some highlighted bits to help you, and some questions you may want to look at. Now, while you're turning to Psalm 25, let me tell you about something that happened to me when I was a mere young person in the last millennium, many years ago. Back in the days when in youth work and Sunday school, can you imagine this now, Babs? You didn't have to do risk assessments. You didn't have to have permission sheets. And this thing called a mobile phone had not been invented. It was many moons ago, and you may have heard me say this story. Our youth group went on a trip to the leisure centre in Swansea. Not LC2, but LC, the one that was there, the leisure centre originally. And we all went down, and it was brilliant. And then after the leisure centre, we'd all gone down in different cars with different youth leaders. We'd all agreed that we'd meet in the Chippy in GCG. You all know the Chippy in GCG, don't you? It was an old wartime fish and chip shop, so we were all going to meet there. So I went back in one car, and I was dropped off outside the fish and chip shop, and that youth leader was going to drop me off there, and another youth leader was going to pick me up from the fish and chip shop with everybody else and take me home. I was dropped off, it was pitch black, and I'll be honest with you, I can say this in Abergavenny, GCG is pretty rough. I was from a little village called Brynam, and we were scared of GCG people. It's a bit like Gilwen, a bit of a Wild West. You know the deal. Sorry, Keris. But there we are. We were there, and I got dropped off. It was pitch black. I waited 2 minutes. No one turned up. 5 minutes. No one turned up. 20 minutes. No one turned up. I was, I think, about 13 years old. I was scared stiff. No mobile phone. Nothing on me at all to find out what was happening. An hour and a half later, I was scared stiff. I needed two things. Number one, I needed guidance. I didn't know what to do. Do you stay where you are, or do you go somewhere else and try and walk home? What do you do? It was about a 5-mile walk home. I needed guidance, and the second thing was I needed deliverance. I needed someone to come and pick me up and take me home. And to make matters worse, I didn't have money for chips. It was terrible. And then an hour and a half later, this poor youth leader drives back panicking. And can I say, this isn't just some uneducated youth leader. She was a deputy head of a school. Comes driving back, panicking, going, oh no, as we left, they all said they were going to McDonald's. McDonald's had just opened in Swansea. They'd all been at McDonald's. I'd been left in a fish and chip shop in GCG. It was the worst hour and a half of my life. And things like that do not happen because we do risk assessments, we get permission forms, and we cover and check everything 3 times over. And the experience that night, I'll be honest, was terrifying. In my mind, I was in the Wild West. In my mind, anything could happen at that time. And when I read Psalm 25, and particularly verses 16 to 22, I think I see something of that experience. Did you see the experience of the psalmist in verses 16 to 22? He says, turn to me, Lord, be gracious to me. Why? Because I'm lonely, I'm afflicted. Verse 17, I'm troubled, I'm in anguish. Verse 18, I'm distressed. Verse 20, I need to be rescued. I need refuge. Verse 22, deliver me. It was difficult. I was waiting to be rescued. I don't know if you ever had to wait to be rescued before. Maybe you've been lost on a mountain and mountain rescues had to come and get you, or perhaps you've been lost in a boat or stuck at sea or something, maybe just stuck on the side of the road in the dark waiting for the AA or the RAC. But when you're waiting to be rescued, it just is incredibly lonely. And I think for us as a society at the moment, we're in a phase of waiting for a rescue. I think lots of us at the moment are looking for guidance and deliverance. So I think all the time we're wondering, what is the next guidance? What can we do? The big one I think we're all waiting for at the moment, what will we be allowed to do at Christmas? And will Christmas be the same as England or not? Because that has huge implications if we can't travel across the border back and forth. And so we're waiting for guidance, but the other thing we're doing is we're waiting for deliverance. We're waiting for, as one great man calls it, the distant toot of the of the bugle on the horizon. Do you remember that nice little press conference? We're waiting, and it seems that the scientists are on their way. It seems like deliverance is coming. But in the meantime, even if you've heard the toot of the bugle on the horizon, if you're lonely, you're lonely. If you're anxious, you're anxious. If you know what it is to have anxiety in your heart or distress, it's there. And I think Psalm 25 speaks into our situation of waiting at the moment. Whether you're waiting to see family, waiting to see whether you're going to get your work back, waiting for school to go back to normal or the new normality to come, I think this psalm speaks in. And the question is, how do we wait? In this season of life, the question I want to ask this evening is, how do we wait? What is the way to wait in a good way? And maybe I can ask you the question, what are you waiting for at the moment? Well, the way we wait, according to verse 21, is that we hope. So have a look at verse 21. My integrity and my uprightness protect me because my hope, Lord, is in you. Now, we've probably got different translations here this evening. Out of interest, you can put your hand up. Did anybody have a different word instead of hope there? So my NIV says in verse 21, my integrity and uprightness protect me because my hope, Lord, is in you. Go on, Bert. For I wait. For I wait for you. That's very interesting, isn't it? Hands up who's got wait in their Bible. Can spot the ESV readers there. The wait is there. It's interesting. So the word hope and wait is the same word. They're just two different ways of translating the same thought. And so actually what I want to show you tonight is there is a waiting that is hopeful. So you can have hope as you wait. It's okay to wait. And there's a way of doing it which is hopeful. And that word is there elsewhere. So it's there in verse 3, if you can see it there. Kids, you've got it there in the green highlight. It's there in verse 3. No one who hopes or waits in the Lord. And verse 5, and my hope is in you. I wait in you. You see, the word there that is key throughout is this word waiting, hoping, which means entwined, holding on to. That's what it means. So let's walk through this psalm to see how it works. Now, Psalm 25 is a beautiful psalm. If you were to read it in the original Hebrew, which I can't, but I can look at apps. If you read it in the original, each verse pretty much starts with a different letter of the alphabet. So it's an acrostic psalm. So it would be like in English, the first sentence would start with A, and then B, and then C, and then D. So it's a beautifully crafted psalm, which we've seen a couple of times. And the psalm bounces between prayer and proposition. So it bounces between the psalmist David speaking to God and the psalmist David saying something about God. So he's praying, and then he's showing you why he's praying it. So you see verses 1 to 7 is a prayer. In you, Lord, I trust, I put myself. There's an I. And then verses 8 to 10 is like propositions. It's stating facts. Good and upright is the Lord. Therefore, he instructs. So you can see there where it shifts. Then in verse 11, you have a really little prayer, but really important, where he says, for the sake of your name, Lord, forgive my iniquity, though it's great. Then in verses 12 to 15, you go back to propositions. Who then are those who fear the Lord? And then at the final part, verse 16 to 22, you're back to prayer. Turn to me and be gracious to me. So you see this beautiful psalm isn't just an acrostic, but it's a prayer and a proposition. And really, that's one of the big lessons in prayer, isn't it? Prayer depends on your view of God. So what you believe about God affects your prayers. So there's a sense in which actually, if you want to grow in prayer, grow in your understanding of God. That's a key kind of lesson in Christian life. So Paul Miller, in his wonderful book, A Praying Life, he says that for him, understanding the fatherhood of God transformed his prayer. Once he realized that God was Father, that changed the way he prays. So if you believe that God is inexhaustible, he has everything and is all-powerful, that will affect the way you pray. if you believe that God is gracious and always hearing, no matter what you've done, it will affect the way you pray. And so when it comes to waiting, those who wait and hope in the Lord, we've really got to understand who we're praying for. So let's walk through it. Let's look firstly at the prayer. The prayer, firstly, is this: to trust and tread in the Lord. To trust and tread in the Lord. So in verses 1 to 3, he's trusting. He's saying, "In you, Lord my God, I put my trust." Now again, interestingly, some of you have probably got in there, it's, "I'm not just trusting in you," because that sounds quite in your mind, doesn't it, to trust in something. So I trust that chair is going to hold my weight, which for me is no mean thing. And so I sit on it because I trust it. It's like we live in our minds. But some of you have got another word in there, out of interest, because we can have a little bit of participation. What word have some of you got in there? Anybody got soul in there? Ah. Because actually, the I trust in you is I trust in you in my soul. So the trust isn't just an understanding, it's actually in the heart. I trust in you, my Lord. I put my trust in you. I trust in you. Why? Because I don't want to be put to shame. I don't want my enemies to triumph over me, verse 2. And actually, verse 3, no one who hopes or waits on the Lord will be put to shame. But shame will come on those who are treacherous without cause. Do you see what he's worried about here? He's worrying about shame. The shame of trusting in something and not getting. So modern equivalents would be emails where you get, offered amazing deals on your retirement fund. Take out all your retirement fund today, do it to us and we will give you returns that are fascinating. And then you do it and then you try to contact them to get your money back and it's all gone. And the shame of admitting that you've been conned is huge, isn't it? To trust in someone, to say to someone, yeah, don't worry, so-and-so said they're going to do it and I'll vouch for them. Have you ever vouched for someone else? We've got a situation at the moment. I can say this. We suggested a builder to someone. It's like best builder we've ever used, absolutely phenomenal. They book this builder, and then the builder just subcontracts to other people. And before you know it, a 6-day job is 7 weeks. And I just feel shame because I vouched for this builder, and actually the builder's just gone, yeah, whatever, I'll just find someone in the yellow pages and hand it on. To trust in someone and then for them not to do it brings shame. And it's exactly the same with God. The psalmist is saying, I'm trusting in you. I don't want to be put to shame. I don't want to tell everybody you are the true God. You are the God of Israel. Because remember, in Old Testament times, it was kind of like, it was like the football league. It was like top of the pops. It was kind of like everybody had a God. Every nation had a God. And everybody was like, yeah, my God brings rain. Yeah, my God keeps my cows alive. Yeah, my God does this. My God does that. But in the end, the proof of the pudding was in the eating. Would they actually come through? And if they didn't, you were shamed. And so he's saying, I don't want to be put to shame. So trust. But don't just trust in God. Verses 4 to 5, tread with him, walk with him. He says, look, I want to trust in you. So show me your ways, Lord. Teach me your paths. Guide me in your truth and teach me. So actually, to hope in God, to wait in God, is to be active in God. So you don't just sit back and hope and wait. You actually follow him. So the image I've been thinking of as I've prepared this week is of getting lost in a cave. Again, back in my childhood, pre-risk assessments, I used to play in local caves. We were surrounded by old caves and old mines. Kids, don't do this. Please don't do this. And as boys, we would go and play in caves. Now, thankfully, we never got lost in them. We never had the guts to go too far. But can you imagine if you got lost in a cave? You got lost in a cave, and then your father came to find you. Well, you could hope in your father finding you, and if he found you, wonderful. But then, this is where the real trust is. You've got to now walk out of the cave with your Father. You've got to follow him. You've got to tread in his ways. And so when we trust in God when we're waiting, we're not just saying, I'm going to wait for you to save me, but I'm actually going to follow you as I wait. Because my waiting is active. It's in my heart. It's hoping. I'm following him. Now, when it comes to following Jesus and trusting in God the Father, often we think we don't deserve to do it. That's part of the problem. You know, if you did get lost in a cave and your father had to come and find you, I wonder what you think your father would do. Wait till I get you home. Wait until you see your mother. What have you done? But actually, you've got to trust. And what do we hear here? We have an amazing Father, verse 6 and 7. Remember, Lord, your great mercy and love, for they are from old. Do not remember the sins of my youth and my rebellious ways. According to your love, remember me, for you, Lord, are good. He's trusting in God, who not only will lead him, but actually will forgive him. It's wonderful. He doesn't have to trust in him because he's been perfect and good. He's trusting in him because God is perfect and good. And so that's how we wait, really, as we learn to trust and to tread in the Lord. And a good question to always ask is, have I trusted in Jesus? Because we've all got sins of our youth. We've all got things we want to forget. We've all got things that we're ashamed of and embarrassed of. And God comes and offers us forgiveness for them all. The question is, have we accepted them? And so he comes, and what we see now is, how do you know that God can forgive you? So you trust and tread in the Lord, but how do you know that your trust is founded? How can you know you're making a wise decision? Well, secondly, verses 8 onwards, remember God's character shown in the covenant. Remember God's character shown in the covenant. Now, there's a big word in there, but let me unpack what I mean. The reason he can trust in God is because he knows what God is like. And the reason he can know what God is like is because of the covenant. Now, the covenant is a Bible word, and it's a word which means promise. Someone's promise to you is their covenant. It's an agreement. And so there in the Bible, there's the old covenant and the new covenant. But ultimately, they're covenants where God promises his love to us. Now, if you've got the handout, kids, everything in yellow is covenant language. It's language from the agreement with God. So, for example, every time in the Old Testament that they call God Lord, that is God's covenant name. That's the name he gives them to say, you can trust me and the covenant. And as well, if you have a look down in verse 6, where it says, remember, Lord, your great mercy and love, and down in verse 7, the word love, that word love there is a covenant love word. It's not just any old word for love, you know, like I love McFlurries. Well, that's true, but I wouldn't die for a McFlurry, not on most days anyway. But there's a love of God which is called a covenant love, which is a love that is undeserving, unending, and unbreaking. So that love that David is praying for is the love of God in the covenant that he promises. You can look over on the other sheet, you see the word love, love again, and Lord. And at the end of verse 10, you actually get the word covenant. It's those who keep the demands of the covenant. And down in verse, for example, verse 13, you see aspects of the covenant like inherit the land. Part of the promise was they would get a land. And what David is doing is he's saying, I'm trusting in you, and I'm going to trust in you because your character, who you are, is revealed in the covenant. And the agreement is really a revelation of the heart of God. And the heart of God is this: what I say, I will do. What I promise, I will give. So if I say you are loved, you are loved. If I say you are saved, you are saved. And so he says, I trust in you. That's why it's interesting, right in the middle of this section, this kind of section of verses 8 to 15, right in the middle you've got a prayer. And the prayer, verse 11, is really interesting. David is very clever and he's figured it out. And verse 11, he says this: for the sake of your name, Lord, forgive my iniquity, though it's great. David has realized that us being saved and kept isn't about our reputation, but God's reputation. So if you get stuck in a cave and the South Wales Mine and Rescue team have to come and rescue you, their ability to rescue you says more about them than you. The ones who have got everything to gain or lose is the South Wales Mining and Rescue team. Because it's down to them. You can't rescue yourself. It's all down to their reputation. And the amazing news of the covenant is that God comes into our cave to rescue us. And he walks us out. And it's all down to his reputation. I'm still amazed. A few years ago, do you remember the boys' football team? Again, no risk assessments going on here. Let's have a football practice, and then let's go down a cave, boys. Okay, so the Thai football coach takes the boys down the cave, monsoon rains come, the waters rise, and they are struck off from everybody. And do you remember the rescue operation? Thousands of people. A guy even died in preparing for the rescue mission. What I find amazing about the rescue mission is that when they finally found the boys, they had to figure out then, how do you get the boys out? Because in effect, there was nothing the boys could do. They couldn't walk out, there was water. They couldn't even dive out because they couldn't be trained. They wouldn't know how to do it. So they couldn't even swim out. They couldn't even be held by the divers and pulled out because they had no idea how the boys would react under those kind of circumstances. So I think pretty much in the end, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they just gave them ketamine. So they basically put them to sleep. That was the only way they were going to get out, was if they kind of put them asleep and then they just swam them out completely. There was no other way. So when those boys got out, amazing as those boys are for keeping calm in all of those long waits, it was all down to the divers. All down to the divers. And it's exactly the same with our salvation. When we're saved by God, it's all down to him. It's all down to him. He saves us completely. And so when we realize what Jesus has done for us, so we call this the new covenant now, that Jesus has come into our world, our cave, and he's died for us. Actually, that means that we can trust him completely because he has done everything. So what should we do then? We remember his character in the covenant, yes. But thirdly, finally, and very quickly, we should turn and trust that our troubles will be gone. We should turn and trust because our troubles will be gone. In the last section, verse 16, having reminded himself of who God is, coming to God and saying, rescue me, I don't want to be put to shame, but you're a God of covenant, you'll never put me to shame. He then claims the prayer and says, so turn to me and be gracious to me. Why? For I'm lonely and afflicted. One of the things I've really been thinking on this year, like I think a lot of people, is the fact that God turns to us because we're lonely and afflicted. Often we think of God as turning to us because we're impressive. Actually, God turns to us because we're lonely and afflicted. One Puritan says this, and you've heard me say this before, so I'm sorry for saying it again. But as a mother is tenderest to the sickest of the children, so too is Christ. And just as when a child is sick, you care for them all the more, so too when we're sick, we're struggling, Jesus cares for us all the more. That's his character. And so we can say to him, turn to me for I'm lonely and afflicted. So if you are waiting at the moment and you are lonely and afflicted in anguish and distress, remember the God of covenant. He has a love for you that is unending and unbreaking. He gave his son for you, and he will come to you. It's a wonderful, wonderful promise. So we wait in the promise because it is all done for us.